Hello, everyone. I am super excited for this fireside chat with Forrester Analyst Heidi Shey. There are a lot of reasons for this excitement. I think the topic is very relevant, and which is, how does zero trust and data protection kind of go together? And also, I cannot think of a better person to have this discussion with than Heidi. Heidi is a principal analyst in Forrester and has been with Forrester since 2006. Her research primarily focus on data security and privacy strategy, policies, related technologies like DLP, rights management, encryption, and nearby spaces. In her role at Forrester, Heidi advises enterprises in applying a zero trust data-centric approach to protecting data. Welcome, Heidi, to this 2020 edition of Security Now.
Oh, thank you very much for having me. I'm excited to be here today.
Yes, and this is a fireside chat. As soon as we figure out how to create digital fire, we'll do that. But meanwhile, let's let's do this. I hope you and everybody at Forrester is safe and the families and you're staying at home. And as we see the second, maybe the third phase in some countries of this pandemic, kind of showing up. I hope everybody's safe, Heidi.
Oh, same for you and yours, and also everyone joining in today.
Yes, thank you. Thanks a lot. So let's delve right into it, Heidi. How does this whole thing of zero trust paradigm, let's say, and everything that we know about data-centric security, data protection, how do these things kind of gel together?
Well, data security, it's for those of you who have been looking at zero trust, it's a key pillar for zero trust. I think there's been this misconception that sometimes still goes around where people think zero trust and they think, oh, it's least privilege or it's about network segmentation. And these are all important pieces of it. But zero trust is today it's comprised of many different types of pillars of control. Data security is one of those key pillars. And unfortunately, I think it's also one of the more challenging parts of the approach and the strategy as well.
Yeah, and what makes it such a big challenge in your experience?
Yeah, like data, it's the volumes of data that businesses are working with, that they're generating, it just keeps growing, right? Data also needs to move. That's how we get value out of it. It's no use if it's just locked up, sitting there somewhere, and no one can access it or touch it. And I think organizations also have a bit of a lack of understanding about the context, about just how data gets used sometimes. So without that, trying to figure out what's the appropriate protections gets a bit difficult. And then also this idea of, well, what is data anyway, right? Is it about files that you're trying to protect? Is that your data? Or are we talking about data like your data in a database? Or are we talking about securing, let's say, the contents of a phone call, a voice call? Like all of this is data, but until we define what it is that is data for a company, that makes it hard to figure out how to take the right steps to go and protect it. And that's also the other component of challenge about the controls that we can select to protect our data, because there are different controls depending on what you're trying to do, different use cases that you might be trying to address. So DLP, for example, it can be helpful, but it's not the thing that you would use for everything when it comes to protecting data. It's only one possible control out of many.
Yeah,
And what about
it is
you?
an interesting.
What are you seeing today when it comes to the challenges with data protection with your customers?
We have a pretty broad ringside view of the challenges that enterprises face across nearly 2,000 enterprises that use our technology today. I think the biggest challenge that we see is, which kind of comes to the topic, the whole theme of this conference, is the need for enterprises to chase data, right? And what is happening is that the data is flowing around from devices to networks to applications to external agencies and so on. and internal and external users. And what we see is that enterprises are constantly forced to chase their data and then to secure everything that that data touches. Right? I'm a science geek, and I like to give examples across physics. So the way I see it is that infrastructure elements like devices, networks, applications, and so on are more like solids, and data is fluid, right? It flows constantly, and it's to be able to secure data is almost like catching water in your hand. It's very, very difficult. Uh, and we see these data chases all the time, right? So if a confidential piece of data might be getting created on a desktop, for example, and therefore I need to protect my desktop, and it is sent over email, so I need to protect my email systems, and then somebody else puts it on Dropbox, and so I need to figure out a way to secure the cloud application, in this case Dropbox, and then an external agency gets access to it, so I need to extend my security policies now to the external agency. So there is a constant need to chase this data and kind of secure everything that data touches, and that is becoming very, very difficult for enterprises today, and that I see is as a big challenge of data security, which is how much can you chase this data, and how many copies of this data, and and so on. So it's a big challenge, and it is like holding water in your hand. It's not easy at all. Um, how do you how do we think about data security strategy then in this context of zero trust?
Yeah, like what you were just describing, it's this chasing, it's not really sustainable over time, and it just gets more difficult. And it's still kind of, I think if we're chasing data still, it's a very sometimes perimeter centric view of how we're looking at security. So under the zero trust context where we're how we're looking at it, that then changes because then it becomes a lot more, it's about being data centric in your approach. And I think a key thing to this approach, where to be data centric, you have to know what it is you're trying to protect. So this is where we come back to the importance of efforts like data discovery, data classification, and this is also where I see a lot of organizations getting stuck because they focus so much on the act of discovering, of classifying, but this is really a means to an end, right? It's the what you do after you understand your data, after you know what you're trying to protect. And oftentimes companies, they do. Like you know what is your really sensitive data, and you know that this is the data that you need to have controls over. But as you're going through and doing discovery and classification, you may also just get more clarity around other types of data that maybe you didn't really think too deeply about before. So it's really about optimizing what you're doing then. And it's not something where I think I see some organizations also get stuck here thinking that they have to discover and classify everything, boil the ocean before they think about applying controls, and that's just not true. You can do these things at the same time. You can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Yes. Um, yeah, and our experience is also that this sequential view, that hey, I need to do enterprise-wide data discovery and classification, and for a reasonable size enterprise, that turns out to be a project which is not in weeks and days and weeks. It does turns out to be months and years sometimes, and not acknowledging that finally data classification is a means, right? The final objective is that you need to be able to secure and make private the data. And our experience again, and our focus has been historically financial services, IP-oriented manufacturing companies, government, defense, highly regulated industries in most cases. Our experience is that if we talk about quick wins, a lot of times the confidential information, like you mentioned, the crown jewels are already known, and therefore just bringing knowledge of the industry to our next enterprise that we work with, and the next bank or the next insurance company or the next manufacturing company that we work with can help, because the time to value to be able to protect data, which is the final objective, can be significantly reduced if in a lot of cases you already know what is confidential. So, for example, our experience of working with financial services companies is that in most cases, the hotspots of potential data breaches are known. It is for every bank, every insurance company is worried about customer data, employee data, best practices and SOPs that need to be protected, which are super confidential. And in some cases, forward-looking financial statements and so on. For manufacturing companies, it is almost always intellectual property, patent information, drug discovery information, engineering designs for the next machine that is going to be created, and so on. And this whole idea of ground-up discovery and classification as a prerequisite to data protection, we see enterprises just a lot of times getting stuck in that rut and not being able to move forward, right? So I think our big challenge is that, hey, you can do this in parallel, right? Yeah. The importance of data discovery and classification, it looks pretty basic, right? I mean, being able to sort data, it's all in one bucket, and you're now being able to put it in 5 different buckets. And I know, Heidi, you've written extensively on this topic. Why do you still see this as a challenge? Why is it not a solved problem 5 years ago?
It's sometimes the things that seem like they're simple they can be pretty complex. With discovery and classification, I think a huge part of the challenge is that it's the technology component that's the last mile. The tools, the tech you bring in that can help you to do this. There's other things that happen before that, where it starts with even things like understanding just what is your data's useful life cycle. What might be your data protection obligations, whether that's privacy regulations that you contend with, or your business partner requirements, as well as also taking a look at, well, how might you go about defining your internal standards, your policy for classification, whether those numbers of levels of labeling that you want to use. Like, this is all different types of upfront planning. It's not about just putting in a tool and it does it by magic. But even then you get to the point where we're looking at tools, oh my gosh, this is where the market is it's very noisy today. These terms, discovery and classification, they can have different definitions, different meanings. So for example, for classification, this could be about identifying what is this data. Is this a social security number? Is this some other kind of account number? Classification can also mean just the act of labeling or tagging, let's say a file with confidential. So like definitions, that's one thing that I think makes it a challenge as people are trying to compare tools. But it's also, when you look at tools, sometimes it's a capability, sometimes it's a feature within something else. So it's hard to sometimes compare this different tools for discovery and classification in an apples to apples type of way. The example that I've been using lately, food related. So it's like you're going to a cafe and trying to order like brunch or breakfast, and bacon. You would like some bacon. There's different types of bacon, but if the menu doesn't really specify, you're not sure what type of bacon you're getting versus what you were expecting. So is it crispy bacon? Is it Canadian bacon? Is it perhaps vegetarian bacon that's made with tofu? So it's one term, but many meanings, and we have to be clear about what it is that we're looking for.
I have this experience with coffee shops, right? And you go to a coffee shop nowadays, and there are a million choices, right? Do you want, almond milk, or, what kind of milk, what kind of sugar, how much of it, brown, white, milk, what kind of coffee, what roast, and so on. And at the end of it, I just want to, get the barista, pull him or her by the collar and say, just give me the coffee, right? Do whatever and just give it to me.
Yeah, because some of these tools, they help you discover and classify, but to help support, let's say, data management. And that's a very different use case than the tools that help you discover and classify for the purposes of security.
Yeah, I hear you totally. I mean, we make we make a lot of tech buying decisions ourselves, and there's just the amount of noise that is out there is just so much. It becomes very difficult, and I don't envy the decision makers at all and their jobs. Uh, let's shift gears a little bit, and we've gone through. I mean, a lot of enterprises are trying to go through this data protection, data security journey. Do you still consider it important to define the value of data, or the potential cost of a data breach and so on, and how much maturity has come along that for internal justifications, or just being able to justify any kind of security investments?
This one is tricky because I think it's hard to do, and I
Mm-hmm.
question the actual value of doing so sometimes. For a couple of reasons. It's very difficult to come to an actual number as your estimate that you can have confidence in. Getting to that actual number may be less important overall. I think that the key thing here is about understanding just the importance, the criticality for the business. Like what value does your data have for the business? Understanding that is important, but trying to put a number to it, sometimes that can just be, you can be going in circles. I see organizations who try very hard to do things like look at, well, how much would a cost of a data breach cost us? And that is very hard to do. Yeah, there's different calculators, different sources you can maybe look at. But at the end of the day, there's so many different variables that can impact that cost of breach. Do you have cyber insurance? How much revenue does your company make? Because sometimes the fines are a percentage of revenue. What other controls do you have in place? How was your response to this actual breach event? Because that can influence whether you get lawsuits or other types of liabilities. It's also, well, what kind of data was compromised? Because if it's customer data, that's one thing. If it was intellectual property, that has other types of costs, but you can't really, depending on the organization, like figure out how to estimate that. Sometimes I've seen people use, well, R&D for this particular product, we estimate will generate X amount of revenue in a certain number of years. And okay, maybe that's another number they can pull in. With customer data, sometimes it's about the fines that are associated with the breach. But what we see is often with customer data in many places, especially the US, it's you're dealing with lawsuits now. And just the cost of responding to that, the legal fees and maybe settlements, or maybe that will then kick off other investigations with regulatory bodies. Like those things will add up over time as well. It's not just that one point in time. So trying to use all of this to make a business case is one side, perhaps, of that case. You're understanding the liability, the cost piece of it, but you're also selling fear at that point to make your case. And I think it can be more valuable to look at the other piece of the equation about, let's implement these controls, these protections. What's the value to be gained from that, from those controls? Are we helping the business maybe generate more revenue in a shorter amount of time? Are we helping our employees be more productive? Different factors to look at. That's the positive side, the benefits. And I think that helps to make a stronger business case today.
Yeah, I always tell potential customers that if you think compliance is expensive, try non-compliance instead, right? And figure out. Yeah, I totally hear you, and I think it's definitely understated the benefits of security, right? It could be that you, because you have data protection now people can work from home, which they wouldn't think of a couple of years ago, right? Critical data can now move to the cloud, which you wouldn't think, security and privacy concerns wouldn't allow that a couple of years ago, and so on. So there is a lot of benefits of security, and a lot of times it is about fear. Hey, something bad is going to happen if you don't have it. But I think we don't, as a community, I think we have to take responsibility that we don't always talk about the positive effects of security, right? The fact that you have bigger brakes in a car can actually help you to go faster, right? Because now you have bigger brakes, so because of that you can go faster, right? And that aspect is understated in all our communications. Um, as you see, I mean, as in Forrester, you must be speaking to a variety of enterprises, right, and different stakeholders within the enterprise and so on. And within this gamut of data protection, data security, you must be dealing with all kinds of approaches. The best of breed, you take the best technology in DLP or the best classification and the best encryption and rights management and so on, versus this the suite kind of offerings where you have a little bit of everything. Are you seeing enterprises and decision makers within enterprises tending towards one or the other, and what kind of patterns are you seeing over there?
Mm, for data security, I feel like it's relatively split. I mean, I see both, really. There are some organizations, their preference is to really try to get as few vendors as possible that they're working with, maybe down to a single vendor if possible. Whereas others, they are all about best of breed, innovation. They want all the more of the shiny things. And sometimes I think this comes down to, well, who is making that ultimate decision? If it's someone in more of a CIO type of role, or maybe the CISO, someone in more of a management, sometimes strategic type of role, might look at the consolidation piece. They might emphasize the importance of having a single vendor that they turn to uh, for maybe ease of management or easier to purchase from, something. But then you'll talk to others who are more hands-on with the tools, your security practitioners. And for these folks, I feel like I get the sense that there's more of a willingness to go with best of breed, sometimes a greater preference as well, because they understand that these are purpose-built tools. They may have capabilities or functionality that they're not seeing elsewhere, and that's what makes this unique. So there's room for both, and I don't think there's a right or wrong approach. But the key thing coming out of this is that regardless of which one you go with or what the strategic plan is to use, it makes the value of integrations available with these tools super important, because you want all of this to work together with other technologies in your environment. Sometimes I've seen cases where if there's a key integration to a key tool with an environment that just doesn't exist, then that's a product that just gets crossed off the list very quickly. What about you? What are you seeing? Are there certain patterns that you're noticing in how people are going with best of breed versus single vendor here?
The pattern that we have seen is for us largely dependent on the size and, in some sense, the complexity of the IT infrastructure. We've seen a clear move where large enterprises have almost no option but to go best of breed. And they are because best of breed technologies tend to be purpose built, they tend to budget for a lot more scenarios. For example, where are the keys stored? How does compliance get taken care of, and so on. And the mid market, small to individual even consumers, they tend to go with whoever is providing them the collaboration software or the email systems, whatever they bundle in is a lot of times good enough. So we see a clear distinction based on the size and complexity of the organizations, right? And it becomes the suite kind of offering becomes unviable for large enterprises, and best of breed becomes a difficult decision for the individual or let's say a 20 people law firm. It becomes a very difficult decision to go select best of breed of 10 different kinds of technologies. And we've also on the decision maker side, I think we've seen the emergence of the CDOs, the chief digital officer, as a new stakeholder in security decisions, right? Which we were not seeing earlier. We are seeing specific integration requests are the most common thing for us. We are seeing, and in case of Seclore, the technology has been built ground up for with integration as as a design principle. We see three primary kinds of integration requests, right? So the first and almost always the most common are collaboration tools. And I use collaboration in a very, very generic term. So these includes email systems, file sync and share, content management systems, messaging systems, and so on. Anything which can help you store and transmit information. And really the requirements come from how can I get data protection without creating additional overheads of security policy and identity management. I've already defined my security policies in Box or my email system or my FileNet or SharePoint kind of systems, SharePoint Online kind of systems. And I don't want to go through another exercise of defining a security policy now that I have data protection and data-centric security. Right? So that's one very common request. The second one are complementary security tools. So these are DLP systems, most common, CASB systems. We just announced a couple of days ago our partnership with McAfee on this. Classification, labeling, and tagging kind of systems, discovery, right? So they are complementary offerings around the core data-centric security that we provide. And again, over there, a big ask and a big reason for enterprises to reach out to us is they don't want to deal with the additional overheads of defining another security policy, another identity system, and systems not working together. The third, which is more recent, I think just the last 2 years or so, is around more and more analytics and event monitoring kind of systems. So these include security analytics tools, SIEM, UBA tools, where enterprises are now looking to aggregate more and more information into their analytics systems. Right? So Seclore already has robust analytics built into it for its own data. But what enterprises now want to do is look at what's happening on the network and what is happening on the device and what is happening to data as it moves across device to cloud to external agencies and so on, and try to make sense of this information together. Right? So we are seeing a lot of requests for integrations with security analytics tools. Right? And that keeps us very, very busy from among 2,000 enterprises, a lot of them in the Fortune 100 category. That's kept the Seclore team very busy over the last many years now. So I think between the two of us, we've already named so many different kind of technologies, even though it's like a 20, 30-minute conversation that we have with so many options. What is that magic bullet, Heidi, that you recommend? How does an enterprise go about choosing the right technologies?
Oh gosh, magic bullets.
Yes, that's the
No,
expectation. No pressure.
but that's not the reality. It's yeah, there are a ton of technologies, and like you mentioned earlier too, also new stakeholders, right? It's not just security. We're looking at compliance. I've seen legal come in. You've got different business units. The chief data officer, the data science teams. That's been an interesting one lately because I've seen them have more influence when it comes to choosing technologies to help support things like de-identification or security for data lakes because they want access to that data and to use it, to get value from it. But overall, I mean, with data security technologies, I think the choices that we make, I feel like they really have to be rooted in having clarity over, well, what is the expected outcome that you have for implementing this tool, this technology, for the type of data that you're trying to protect. Because if you are trying to implement a control to protect your unstructured data, your files, I mean, that is a very different thing from perhaps the tools and controls that you would then use to protect data that's sitting in your database. That's also different from what you might use for protecting your emails and so on. So it's really focusing on that outcome and the use case that you're trying to address here. So is it going to be focused on compliance, or are you looking at addressing concerns around, let's say, insider threats? Or is this about facilitating data sharing? Something, but having clarity over that use case. So that's one piece of it that goes into the decision for the choice that you make. The others, I think, I see people making decisions also based on how this tool might get deployed. because as an organization, they may have a strategy where they're trying to do more things in the cloud as well as deliver services from the cloud. So that might be a key factor. Or tools that are specific for addressing key regulatory requirements. That could be another consideration, but also resources that would be required to manage this technology, to deploy, to implement, and to maybe care and feed for it over time. That's also an important consideration.
And I think one of the things that we've seen is also about whether they are trying to solve, the enterprise trying to solve a point problem or an enterprise-wide program, right? And I think that also differs. And sometimes you might end up making the same choice, but in a lot of cases it might be can be different. What other kinds of do you see enterprises looking for control options in nearby areas, like next generation firewalls and so on? Have you seen some of that?
Yes, that is happening as well. Because we also see data security features and capabilities within other tools. So the next-gen firewall is a great example. Some of these also have DLP functionality built in. It could also be, let's say, your email security solution has some element of control, whether it's for encryption or file sharing. That could be other features that are a part of it. So when we think about zero trust, I talked earlier about how data is one of those key pillars, but there's other pillars of control that we consider. So it's controls for your network. That's another pillar. Controls for protecting your workloads. So whether this is your databases, cloud, applications, that's another pillar. Another pillar of zero trust here is devices. So controls for that, and as well as people. So just imagine these 5 key pillars of controls, data pillars at the center, which intersects with these other pieces. So that's how you might find features and capabilities within other tools that have these functionalities. And I think as you're looking at what you might be using or choosing to adopt, it's also worth considering what are those intersection points between these pillars, because you might already have the capability within some other tool that you've purchased and deployed and maybe you're not really using. So make the most of what you already have. Or it could be clear that what you already have is not sufficient. So that can help you to build your business case to invest in something that is more purpose-built or best of breed for what you need for security.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Our experience, I mean, yeah, we might be biased. Seclore is one of the leading providers in this category, but I think our experience is that a lot of times enterprises undermine the importance of the project, right? The process around the technology, and therefore ensuring project success is almost more important than choosing the right technology, right? And a lot of times enterprises just do not give enough importance to that aspect. And at Seclore, we've acknowledged that a long time ago. We are a bunch of tech geeks that started this company, but over a period of time, reality has struck that the best technology doesn't always win, but the best project or best customer success, right? The enterprises which invest a lot in customer success, all, without exception, always win, right? So that's one thing that we see enterprises still going through a lot of, and especially security teams within enterprises not acknowledging the importance of the project around the technology. The second thing that we've seen is that data protection, and we touched about it a little bit earlier in the conversation, is that data protection initiatives can really start from anywhere. They can start with just being able to track where data is going, or they can start with protection. Hey, I already know here is a box folder which is storing all my confidential information, or here is the SharePoint library, or here are a set of users who I already know are exchanging forward-looking financial statements and so on. So the data protection initiatives can start with protection, or it could start with a pointed or an enterprise-wide discovery and classification program. So really, depending on the context, data protection can start from anywhere. And in fact, we have written an ebook on specifically this topic of where does an enterprise start with data protection, right? And I encourage everybody on this session to go check out the ebook on the Seclore website. The third thing that I would say, which should be an important kind of criteria as an enterprise goes around making a decision, is that planning for an enterprise-wide initiative while deploying something more pointed and ensuring quick wins in the deployment is the best way, and we've had maximum success in doing it that way, right? So you plan something enterprise-wide, but then you focus on what are the 5 big things that I want to protect within the first 2 weeks or was first 30 days of this initiative. What are the 5 things that I want to be able to protect, right? And it could be specific to a kind of information or a specific user group. So I only want to start with focus on the R&D team because they are the ones who are handling the crown jewels for the enterprise, right? So uh, ensuring project success, I think, is as one. Just starting from wherever is important, right, and not getting stuck in a particular sequence, and then ensuring quick wins, right? Things which can be delivered in weeks, couple of weeks, maybe a month, even at the largest size of the enterprises. I think those are 3 big things which are often overlooked as enterprises consider features and and benefits and features and bells and whistles of the technology. Well, we are kind of at the top of the hour. We'll take. I think we only have time for one audience question. So we'll see. We have a whole host of questions coming. I'll pick one, and that's all we have time for. Let's see. Okay, I'll choose this. What is a bet? Are there better ways than what enterprises have been doing historically of implementing DLP and CASB? Some of the big data protection initiatives in the enterprise. So what are better ways of implementing DLP and CASB for zero trust in the context of data protection? So it's kind of an all-encompassing question, but yeah, are there better things? Can DLP and CASB technologies just deliver more value in this present context?
Oh, okay. Pretty loaded question as well, man.
It is.
CASB, DLP. I mean, I think I still come back to purpose of what an organization is trying to do with these technologies that they've put in. Because like a CASB, I see a lot of these. Yes, they've got some data protection features, capabilities within them, but sometimes a key need for bringing these in is getting visibility of what is going on, what's happening, or maybe there's something in there about identifying threats to your data. DLP, I see these types of tools often being implemented because it's yes, visibility is a key thing here, but it's about also how do we enforce certain policies around data movement. And oftentimes for both of these, for CASB, for DLP, it's you're trying to prevent something from leaving, right? Or if you're letting it leave, then there's certain conditions that you want in place for that data to leave and leave securely. So it's you're addressing certain things with these tools, but by no means can they address everything you need in terms of a control over your data. And I would say they complement each other when we look at these tools versus other things, it's like rights management, for example, because you can think of them as integrated systems. These things don't really, or they shouldn't be siloed, standalone tools that are just there. You kind of want them to be a little bit smarter, intelligent, and understanding context that they're seeing from other tools and other activity and behaviors that are happening all around.
That's very valuable, and we see this very, very often where combinations of technologies can create value far beyond the individual technologies working in silos, right? And I'll quickly think of 2 examples that we have very recently. right? One is a very large financial services company, is one of the Fortune 50, maybe definitely Fortune 100 companies. And they've had DLP for some time, 7, 8 years, maybe 10 years. And one of the big challenges that they were facing is the number of alerts, no surprises, that the DLP system generates, the number of events, and then how do you make sense of these events. And when we first, the Seclore team was first talking to them, they were at I think 800,000 or 900,000, just under a million events from just the email component of the DLP generated per day. And that requires either some really sophisticated analytics tools or an army of people to make sense out of, right? If you're generating a million events just from the email component a day.
Oh, that's
And
painful.
yeah, I don't even know what a million events looks like. Uh, but yeah, when we talk to them, the big problem was that DLP unfortunately has only two choices, right? After it analyzes the email or the attachments to an email, it can either stop that email or it can let the email go, and either of this is a problem, right? If you stop the email, right, there's collaboration effects and productivity and so on. And if you let it go, then hey, what's the purpose? It's not data loss prevention. Then it's just data loss detection. And when we combined with the DLP system, fast forward 6 months later, we combined and integrated. We deployed one of our DLP connectors for the enterprise. What was happening is that now the DLP had an option number 3, which is to be able to protect that email and the attachments and then let it go. Right now, just by having that third choice, that I think this email kind of looks confidential, so I must protect it before I let it get delivered or let it leave the enterprise, and without causing any user overheads, user friction. The number of events that the DLP now generates has come down from just about 800,000 is what I remember when we started, down to about 35, 40,000. Now, 35, 40,000 is still not a small number, but it's still 95% reduction, because now the enterprise is able to take a choice that, hey, I will protect every email that I consider confidential and then just let it go. So it achieves what are mutually conflicting goals of security and productivity, or security and collaboration, but together, right?
Mm.
So
It's more
here is a
enabling
good,
once you have these
yeah, it
working
is
together.
exactly right. So now you're looking at the two technologies working together as an enabler, and not and not complicating lives for the enterprise. Another example that, again, this was very recent, is one of the very large manufacturing companies, I think the largest in its category. They were using an online file sync and share service. There was a CASB deployment which had already taken place, many months before we started talking to the enterprise. And over there, again, one of the big challenges was that the CASB system was able to go into the file store, inspect content, be able to, flag confidential data being stored in a cloud system and so on, and be able to actually edit permissions of that particular folder. But the challenge over there is that one of the big reasons that the enterprise even chose to deploy or use a file sync and share system was easy collaboration with external agencies. And now the CASB system goes in, inspects the content, and stops external agency access, or sometimes even just outright deletes the data from the public cloud, service. Started creating a lot of challenges, right? This was again a conflict between collaboration, ease of use, ease of sharing, with security concerns, right? Hey, there's confidential information lying in a public cloud environment, which is not allowed for a lot of times for security concerns, but equally for compliance, ITAR, EAR kind of concerns. And
Yeah,
and we
the tools are
combined,
working as intended.
yes, exactly. Both the tools are there, but together they are creating the challenge. And we combined, and we, in this case, we integrated with, we deployed our integration with the file sync and share system as well as the CASB system. And what happened now is that the CASB system was not changing the permissions, or it was not removing permissions and so on. As soon as it detected a confidential piece of information lying on the file sync and share system, it would just go and apply protection policies to that content. Right? So again, this is a good example where the CASB system is not tinkering around with policies and removing permissions and generating a million events a day, but it's actually just acknowledging that, hey, this is confidential information. It needs to stay protected as it goes to the cloud and sometimes to external agencies. And again, the number of incidents and of people just not being able to share information on using the file sync and share system, that reduced drastically through this journey. Right? So it's very, very important that to acknowledge that these different DLP, CASB, and rights management data-centric security systems, a lot of times together they deliver far more value than just being treated as independent silo technologies. Well, we are at the top of our time, Heidi. It's been such a pleasure talking to you, and thanks a lot for coming and attending the event with us. In an actual event, you would be on stage, and I would come and give you a memento. And as soon as we figure out a digital version of of that, we'll definitely have the memento over to you. Thank you. Thanks a lot, Heidi. It's been a pleasure.
Well, thanks so much for having me here today. It was great.
Ciao. Stay safe.
You too.
Thanks a lot, everyone who's been attending this event. It's been a pleasure talking to Forrester analyst Heidi Shey. Have a good one. Thank you.